Clara is standing under the flickering neon sign of the diner, tears streaming down her face. In one hand, she clutches her last paycheck. In the other, a battered leather wallet with just a few crumpled dollar bills inside. She stares at the asphalt, her breath shaky as headlights pass by. She believed doing the right thing would protect her, but instead, it cost her everything. Hours later, her life would be changed forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story like this. 24 hours earlier, Clara walked into the diner at 7 a.m., shifting her apron and steeling herself for the long shift. The smell of coffee and grease, the hiss of the grill. These were familiar companions. She was exhausted, but she needed the income. She had rent due, medicine for her mother, and student loans she'd never escape. She smiled at regulars, remembered their orders, tried to be kind even when she was bone-tired. At lunch, a man named Mark came in. He ordered more than a simple meal, a huge order, dozens of dollars. But near the end, when the bill came, he quietly slipped Clara an envelope and asked, "Would you mind giving this to your coworkers who've been understaffed?" Clara hesitated. Sharing tips had always been a sore topic among staff. Some got upset, some felt entitled, some complained. But the way Mark looked at her, resolute, kind, made her nod. She walked back to the kitchen, unfolded the envelope. Inside was $5,000. Mark's only request: split it fairly among those working today. Her heart pounded. If true, this could help cover certain bills she didn't dare mention aloud. She called her coworkers one by one, the busser, the cook, another server. She handed out shares, apologizing, explaining, trying not to make a scene. Some were grateful. One, Jason, a waiter who had been silent all day, refused some share, saying, "I don't want special treatment." But she insisted, "You worked, you deserve this." That night after the dinner rush, the owner, Mrs. Harding, asked Clara to come into the small office behind the fryer. The air smelled faintly of old grease. The walls were faded. Harding looked tired, annoyed. "I'm letting you go," she said. Clara blinked. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" Her voice shook. Harding's reply: "This has caused unrest. Some staff feel unfairness. It's become a distraction. It's best for everyone." No mention of gratitude, no apology. Clara left the office in disbelief, walked to her car, hands trembling, head spinning with questions. How could generosity hurt her? How could she be punished for kindness? The next morning, the news broke locally. A waitress had received a $5,000 tip and shared it among her coworkers, and was fired days later. The story spread. People were outraged. Some called Harding's decision cruel. Some defended the business, needing to maintain order. Clara was thrust unwillingly into a spotlight. Online, people supported her. Some threatened boycotts. A GoFundMe popped up to help her with rent and bills. Weeks later, Clara sat in a small apartment, her mother beside her. She looked at the envelope of messages of support on her phone. "I cried when I saw this. If that were me, thank you for choosing others over yourself." Clara swallowed. She would need a job. She would need to move on. But she also needed this to mean something beyond pain. One evening she went to the diner again, this time as a customer. Mrs. Harding recognized her. Silence stretched. Harding said nothing but looked at her with strained eyes. Clara ordered coffee, paid, and left. No confrontation, no revenge, just dignity. In time, Clara found a new job, not glamorous, but stable. She saved enough to help her mother fully. She used the story to start a local nonprofit helping service workers who suffer unfair dismissal. She never forgot the sting of that last paycheck or the worn pocket of. Clara's life was far from easy, but she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who didn't have the luxury of slowing down. Every morning began the same, dropping her son off at school before racing to the diner, apron tied loosely around her waist, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She worked the breakfast rush with a smile, remembering regulars by name, knowing exactly how Mr. Thompson liked his eggs, or how Mrs. Rivera always asked for an extra slice of lemon in her tea. The diner itself was small, tucked on the corner of Main Street, its walls lined with faded photographs from the 70s. It had that warm, small-town charm, but everyone knew business wasn't booming. Some days the booths were half empty, and the hum of the coffee machine filled the silence more than conversation did. For Clara, though, this wasn't just a job, it was survival. Rent was past due. The landlord had left 2 notes on her door already. Her son's school had sent reminders about overdue lunch payments. Every tip, every extra shift mattered because losing this job wasn't an option. She was already juggling a second job cleaning offices at night, often running on just 3 or 4 hours of sleep. But she pushed through because that's what mothers do. What Clara didn't know was that one forgotten wallet, left behind on a sticky diner table, would put her at the center of a storm, one that would test not only her livelihood, but the very values she held closest to her heart. It was a Saturday morning, and the diner was louder than usual. The breakfast rush had every booth filled, orders flying in from all sides, the scent of bacon and syrup hanging heavy in the air. Clara darted from table to table, balancing plates, topping off coffee cups, her smile masking the exhaustion she carried. Among the regulars that morning was a man she didn't recognize. Polished suit, gold watch glinting under the fluorescent lights, tapping his fingers impatiently as if every second here was wasted time. He ordered quickly, barely looking up at her face, his phone glued to his hand. When he finally left, it was without so much as a thank you, but as Clara returned to clean his booth, she froze. Resting against the ketchup bottle was a thick, black leather wallet. She opened it just slightly. Rows of crisp $100 bills stared back at her. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Rent was already 2 weeks late. Her son had asked for new shoes she couldn't afford. Medicine for her mother sat on the pharmacy shelf, waiting. No one had seen her pick it up. No one would know if she slipped just a little out, maybe enough to buy herself some time. But Clara's hands trembled as she pressed the wallet shut, whispering under her breath, "This isn't mine." She rushed outside, spotting the man just as he stepped into his sleek black car. "Sir, excuse me," she called, jogging across the cracked pavement. He turned, irritation on his face. "You forgot this." She held out the wallet, her chest heaving from both the sprint and the weight of her decision. He snatched it without looking her in the eye. "Yeah, thanks." No smile, no gratitude, just the screech of tires as he pulled away. Clara stood there a moment, stunned by how little it seemed to matter to him, before slipping the apron tighter around her waist and heading back inside. What Clara didn't know was that someone else had been watching her every move, and soon her life would be turned upside down. The breakfast rush had just begun to thin when he walked in, a man Clara had never seen before. Everything about him announced wealth. The tailored suit, the polished cufflinks, the expensive cologne that lingered in the booth even after he sat down. He ordered quickly, barely glancing at her, his tone sharp, impatient, as though even speaking to her was beneath him. Clara delivered his meal, refilled his coffee, endured the way he tapped his watch when the food didn't arrive as fast as he wanted. And then, just as quickly as he had come, he was gone, leaving behind a messy table, a half-scribbled signature on the receipt, and the faint rattle of his car keys disappearing into the parking lot. Clara reached for the check to clear the booth, and that's when she saw it. A wallet, thick, heavy, resting against the sugar jar. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the smooth leather. She hesitated, opened it just enough to see the contents. Cash, more than she'd seen in months. Her heart raced. Her rent was overdue, her son's lunch balance was negative, and the pharmacy had already called twice about her mother's prescription. For a split second, a whisper slipped into her thoughts. No one would ever know. She stood there frozen, every responsibility, every unpaid bill weighing down on her. and then, almost angrily, she snapped the wallet shut, gripping it firmly in her hand. She knew what she had to do. Clara pushed through the diner doors, stepping into the cool morning air. She spotted him just as he opened the door to a sleek black car. "Sir," she called, her voice strained. "You forgot this." She jogged toward him, holding out the wallet. He turned, annoyance written across his face, as though she had interrupted something far more important. He yanked the wallet from her hand, barely meeting her eyes. "Yeah, thanks," he muttered, before sliding into the car. The engine roared, and within seconds he was gone, leaving Clara standing in the parking lot, her chest still pounding from the choice she had made. What Clara didn't know was that someone else had been watching her every move, and that moment, so quickly dismissed by him, would soon change the course of her life forever. When Clara walked back inside, she tried to steady her breathing, tried to shake off the sting of his dismissive response. She had done the right thing, she knew that. But the moment she tied her apron back around her waist, she felt the eyes of her manager, Mr. Daniels, locked on her. He motioned for her to step aside near the counter, his face pinched with irritation. "What was that out there?" he asked in a voice sharp enough for nearby staff to hear. Clara blinked. "A customer left his wallet. I ran it out to him." Daniels folded his arms. "You left the floor during a rush. You kept paying customers waiting. That's stealing time, Clara. Time this diner can't afford." Her stomach dropped. "Stealing time? I was just—" But he cut her off, raising his voice. "Distracted. Careless. You put this place at risk. If someone complains, it's on me, and I won't have it." By now, the words were spilling into the open room, carrying to the ears of co-workers and customers alike. Conversations quieted. Forks hovered in midair. Clara felt her cheeks burn as Daniels stepped closer, his voice lowering just enough to sound final. "You're done here. Clock out. Now." The weight of his words hit harder than she expected. She felt her throat tighten, her eyes sting. "Please, Mr. Daniels, I need this job. My rent, my son, please. I was just trying to do the right thing." For the first time, her voice cracked in front of strangers, her dignity unraveling under the fluorescent lights of the diner. But Daniels didn't flinch. He gestured toward the door, his jaw set. "You can collect your last check by the end of the week." Clara looked around, at the cooks peeking through the kitchen window, at the regulars who lowered their eyes, pretending not to witness her humiliation, at the half-finished plates that suddenly felt like part of a stage she'd been dragged onto. She untied her apron slowly, her fingers trembling, and set it on the counter. The room seemed unbearably quiet as she walked to the exit, her footsteps echoing more loudly than they should have. Outside, the late morning sun blinded her for a moment, the world moving on as if nothing had changed. Clara thought her act of honesty had ruined her life, but this was only the beginning. Clara walked the long stretch home that afternoon, the diner's neon sign shrinking in the distance behind her. Each step felt heavier than the last. She thought about her son, David, waiting at home with his backpack on the floor and his homework spread across the kitchen table. How was she going to explain that the one job keeping them afloat was gone? Her rent was already overdue, her phone buzzing with reminders she couldn't face. The pharmacy had left another message about her mother's prescription. Every number she owed seemed to grow louder in her mind with each block she crossed. She gripped her last paycheck so tightly in her hand that the edges creased, the paper damp with sweat. What Clara didn't know was that the man who had brushed her off so coldly that morning was no ordinary customer. He wasn't just wealthy. He was a well-known business owner, a philanthropist whose name appeared on plaques at the library and the children's hospital. Though he hadn't shown it then, he had noticed something rare in her actions, a woman who chose honesty when no one was watching. To him, that moment wasn't meaningless. It was a reminder that character still existed in places most people overlooked, but Clara couldn't know any of this as she trudged up the worn steps to her small apartment. She opened the door to see David rushing toward her, eyes bright. "Mom, did you bring dinner?" he asked, his smile making the weight in her chest almost unbearable. She forced a nod, brushing a hand over his hair as her own thoughts churned with quiet panic. She didn't have answers. Not yet. She only had the silence of unpaid bills staring back at her from the kitchen counter, the landlord's note folded in plain sight. As the evening sun dipped low, Clara sank into a chair, her son humming softly in the next room, and buried her face in her hands. She thought her life had collapsed in the space of a single morning, but what she found waiting at her door that evening would turn despair into something else entirely. The evening had settled into a heavy stillness when Clara heard it, the low hum of an engine outside her apartment. She pushed aside the curtain, heart quickening as a sleek black car eased to a stop by the curb. For a moment she thought it was a mistake, maybe a neighbor's visitor, until the back door opened. The man from the diner stepped out, no longer just another impatient customer, but someone who carried presence in every stride. Beside him was another figure, sharp in appearance, briefcase in hand, his lawyer. Clara's breath caught as a knock sounded at her door. She opened it slowly, confusion and fear woven across her face. "Ms. Reynolds?" the lawyer asked politely. "We'd like a word." Behind him, the man gave a small nod. His tone, unlike earlier, was steady and deliberate. "That wallet you returned, it wasn't just cash. Inside were documents, private keys, things tied to business holdings worth far more than I can explain in a hallway." Clara's mind reeled. She thought back to that moment in the diner, when she nearly slipped a single bill from the stack. Had she done so, the world might have shifted in ways she couldn't imagine. The man continued, his expression softening. "You could have kept it. No one was watching. But you didn't. And I don't take that kind of integrity lightly." The lawyer opened the briefcase, revealing papers Clara didn't fully understand, and a check already written in her name. "Consider this a reward," the man said, "for doing what most wouldn't." Then, after a pause that stretched heavy in the air, he added, "But I'm also offering you something more. A position in one of my foundations. Work that matters. Work that could secure your son's future." Clara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt colliding with this chance she never expected. Her hands trembled as she met his eyes, caught between gratitude, disbelief, and fear of what saying yes might mean. Clara's next decision would not just affect her life, but her son's future. That night, long after the black car had driven away, Clara sat in her dimly lit kitchen with the offer replaying in her mind. A check already signed, a job opportunity she never could have dreamed of. How could this be real? Every instinct told her to be cautious. Life had taught her that people didn't just hand out lifelines without expecting something in return. Was this man genuine, or was he playing her for a fool? She thought of David asleep in the next room, clutching the same worn blanket he had since he was a toddler. Could she risk his future on a stranger's promise? Days later, her phone rang. It was the lawyer. The man was hosting a charity gala, and he wanted Clara there, not as a worker, not in the shadows, but as his guest. Clara almost refused. She imagined stepping into a room full of polished faces and expensive gowns, feeling like an intruder, but something inside her pushed her to say yes. Maybe it was desperation, maybe curiosity, maybe the faint hope that his words were true. When she arrived at the gala, the sight left her breathless. Crystal chandeliers lit the hall, but it wasn't the wealth that stunned her. It was where it was going. On the stage, stories were shared of scholarships for underprivileged kids, housing for single mothers, medical care for families who couldn't afford it. Clara watched as the man she had nearly dismissed as arrogant poured his fortune into lives that looked far too much like hers. She saw photographs of women who had been given a second chance, children whose futures had been rewritten. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: possibility. But possibility came with fear. Was she stepping into a world too far beyond her reach? Was she risking the little stability she had left for something she didn't understand? Now I want to ask you, if you were in Clara's shoes, standing there with a choice between fear and opportunity. Would you trust a stranger's hand, or would you walk away? As the evening reached its peak, the man stepped onto the stage, the room falling silent as his voice carried through the hall. He spoke of giving, of responsibility, of the rare quality that money could never buy, integrity. And then, to Clara's shock, he gestured toward her table. "Tonight," he said, "I want to honor someone who reminded me why this work matters. A woman who chose honesty when no one was watching. Clara Reynolds." The room erupted in applause as every head turned toward her. Clara's cheeks flushed, her hands trembling as she struggled to process what was happening. The man continued, explaining that her small act of returning a forgotten wallet had safeguarded documents worth millions. More than that, it had revealed her character. He announced that she would be joining his foundation, helping to manage community projects across the state. A stable job, fair pay, and respect, things she had never thought would be within her reach. And then his voice softened. "For her son, David, we're granting a full scholarship, so that his future will never be defined by the struggles his mother carried alone." Clara felt her chest tighten, tears streaming freely as the room stood to their feet, applauding louder still. In a single day, she had lost everything: her job, her dignity, her sense of security. But in the very same day, she discovered that honesty can open doors no money can buy. Clara would later say it was the smallest decision that changed her life. Sitting in her modest apartment weeks after the gala, she reflected on that moment in the diner when temptation whispered in her ear. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the hardest choice is the right one. I thought I had lost everything, but really, I had gained more than I ever dreamed." Her new job at the foundation gave her stability she had never known before. Each morning she walked into an office where her voice mattered, where her work carried weight. At home, David's smile grew brighter as he spoke of his future with a scholarship secured, no longer shadowed by the fear of unpaid bills. For the first time in years, hope wasn't just a word, it was their reality. Clara's story reminds us that integrity does have a cost. Sometimes it means humiliation, sacrifice, or standing alone. But the reward it brings is priceless, and it can transform lives in ways no one expects. Now I want to ask you, what would you have done in Clara's shoes? Let us know in the comments. And if this story touched you, please like and subscribe. It helps us share more powerful stories every week.